Please be seated. Mi gente means my people. Actually, we could start with a Spanish lesson. Can you say it after me? I'm going to say it again. Mi gente. It means my people. So I want to talk to you today about mi gente. But first, the book of Luke, which we get to read this year, is so beautifully constructed. You might hear some hints of what's to come in the little passage that we had today. Hear the words of John the Baptizer. The one who is coming is greater than me. I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandal. In the upcoming verses, John, who is approaching his own death, will baptize his cousin Jesus the foot washer, who will wash the feet of his disciples as he approaches his own death and commands us to do the same. The entire book carries the themes and images of these first three rich chapters through all the way in a wonderful topsy-turvy word revolution kind of way. So do plan to enjoy Luke with us this year, including the parts the committee who puts together the lectionary, the schedule of Sunday readings, have left out, and maybe especially those parts. So first, your assignment for the calendar year coming forward is to read Luke and read it over and over again. It's just stunning as a text. So today, John the Baptist says, essentially, mi gente, my people, the weight of sin is upon us. Repent and return. When they say, how? What shall we do? He says, be just and right and honest. He demands it of them in ways that look really quite simple in this text. But that meant that if you are a soldier or a tax collector, an employee of Caesar, the occupying force in this small place, it says, do not exploit your people, even though you can. Do not take advantage of them. And the taking advantage he references in this reading was not outrageous. It was essentially legal. It was what was expected or commanded. There wasn't payroll in quite the way that we have it today, right? Certain people with certain uniforms did as they pleased or needed, or as they might say, as they were commanded. The people were terrorized by their own people in the uniform of Caesar. And remember, Luke is beautifully and with intention drawn for us. There is a reason it does not say, and the housewife and the carpenter and the farmer and the fisherman asked, and we, what should we do? Luke points us intentionally at the beginning to those with power that can get into your pocket, power that had to do with the bodies of the vulnerable, and Luke doesn't let up. It's all the way through. Repent and return. The prophet Zephaniah says it like this: God says, I will save the lame and gather the outcast, and I will change their shame into praise and renown in all the earth. At that time, I will bring you home. I will remove disaster from you so that you will not bear reproach for it. I will deal with all your oppressors at that time. For Christians, when you read the minor prophets like Zephaniah, and I'm sure you do regularly, you're on your way in the Bible to the Gospels. They are just a few pages away, and this is their setup. So the concrete realities of people living under subjugation for centuries is the setting for Jesus showing up. Now, scholars will tell you, and there's some of you in this room, that these books are not best read in that way. But I think it's actually also important to consider that those who put it together, imagining how to proclaim the faith that was in them, sought out this order. Jesus' birth, textually, is in response to these prophets, they decided. And so the people who put our Advent readings together do the same for today. Repent and return, my people, says John. I think it's a strange choice, frankly, because in Luke, the Annunciation and the Magnificat, the Annunciation of the angel and Mary's response, the birth of Jesus and the temple story, that wonderful verse, Jesus increased in wisdom and in years, basically he got old, is at the end of chapter 2. We're in chapter 3. This Jesus that John proclaims is an adult, about to claim the mantle of John and the prophets. But we today wait in anticipation in this Advent season of incarnation, the birth of a baby, in a particular place to a particular people. The particularity is important enough that stars and animals are named and the local political history is described in Luke in enough detail to place the story in time. Incarnation has to do with real bodies, real people, and the disturbing teaching that God comes to be among us. God is with us. Now, I can speculate on how we get 4 weeks of John in these readings. The idea of a committee of guys with probably a disproportionate number of people named John probably had something to do with this. But also, if you're a Christian in Northern Europe and Middle East, and it is cold, and the light of day is not long, and political turmoil was the order of the day until very recently in history, it makes sense that this is what we read in this time of year. It is darker and darker and darker outside. If your people have a practice of praying for the light to come back, it makes sense that this is what we would do. But today in Montego Bay and Cartagena and Kottayam and Cape Town, we might have to use our imaginations a lot to imagine this darkness that you describe, but we can understand why in England the songs of their local context of warm fires and frosty winds would be the tradition. At our best, we tell the story of Christ among us by identifying our particulars as well. Here in this city, we walk in canyon streets with little light and every kind of face imaginable, passing by speaking a multitude of languages that I cannot understand. And some reach out with their hands for anything at all from us, in the shadow of a statue that proclaims liberty, in a nation that rejects the desperate, along the waters of a mighty river that provide the finest drinking water in the nation to us free of charge. This is our context, right? And to us as well, right here, Christ will come. So why does this matter? Christmas of all seasons is material. It is about flesh and blood. It is about a proclamation and a pregnancy and a new and vulnerable life. Like the foot-washing Jesus, Christmas turns over our good expectations of what power and holiness might look like. In many parts of the country, churches this past week or today are celebrating the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, Mary of the Americas. The Anglican Church in Mexico is far more Protestant than we Episcopalians here in the U.S., so our sibling church in Mexico is less likely to do this. But Episcopal churches in the U.S. do. And interestingly, when I've worked in Los Angeles and in Texas, I've met lots of Methodists and Presbyterians and Lutherans who do as well. I even met a Baptist once who did, and I don't know how they do that. But we do it, I think, because people who are formerly Roman Catholic and worship in our communities bring this tradition to us from Central America. We do it also because I think as Americans, we are not a land filled with mysticism in our Christian movements. In Europe, Mary appears all over Europe, and the people build a shrine and insist upon honoring her until the church gets on board. We don't have a lot of that here in the lower 48. But in Mexico, a Nahuatl-speaking man named Juan Diego sees Mary with a glorious crown upon her head, the Queen of Heaven, in a place where Tonatzin, the mother of the gods in the Aztec practices, was found. The Guadalupe Shrine in Mexico City is the third most visited sacred site on the planet, the most visited among Christian sites. It says over the doors of that great shrine, "No estoy yo aquí que soy tu madre." Am I not here, I who is your mother, I your mother. Like the great proclamation of naming by God of God's self, I am who I am. It's hard to tell from the story if it means that Tonatzin remains with her people after they have been conquered by Spain, or if the Roman Catholic Church that came with Spain declares Mexico for the church by colonizing faith itself. We do know, and the image is great if you haven't seen it before, that the very illogical framing choices that have been made over the years by the church there to hide the crown on her head say something about our struggle with Mary and who she is. And we know that people come by the thousands all the time with the needs of their hearts on display for her to that place. When I was at St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, I heard a story of a print image from the Guadalupe Shrine, which is a basilica from which you can buy official copies of this thing. It's quite a beautiful thing. That they would buy an official one, and they would process with it, carried through North America by migrants, all the way to New York and past on foot, by car, and by bus, to mark the path of her children in the Americas. She is here with us. This past week, some of us were in El Paso and Juarez to learn about the immigration crisis firsthand and to think about how we can help and what we can do. There is a human rights disaster on our southern border. If any of you didn't know that, I'm sure you all do. It carries through Central America and is a result of generations of disruption of local government by outside forces, including us. The geopolitics, the Caesars of this time, have left people vulnerable to forces so far beyond themselves that the most modest are desperate for a way to survive in safety. So they travel towards us. A few towns on the Mexican border received the bulk of these people. Thousands. Can you imagine thousands of the poorest of the poor of the earth showing up with nothing in your town? Nowhere to go, with no plan to get to their final destination, and almost all have relatives in the United States. These towns, as you can imagine, have mixed feelings about this. Of course, right? It would be difficult. Some people are very open-hearted and broken-hearted and beautiful and compassionate, and you can imagine those people in our communities. These people from neighboring countries are in so much need. And some, and you can imagine this as well in our communities, are quite angry about the radical disruption of daily life that this does mean. And some are ambivalent. It's just hard. It's hard to watch. It's hard to help. The Red Cross is there. Churches and NGOs offer help. Almost all of the people traveling will travel to a port of entry and file an asylum claim. That's why they've come. Some will be convinced by coyotes to pay them to cross the river illegally, and it's a lot of money. It would be a lot of money for us. They come with their families because they know with our tighter border security, they might never go back to where they've come. It used to be, and I'm from Texas, that you could work in the US and go home for the holidays and help your family and live a decent life in your country of origin. Just work here, and you could retire there. Ironically, tightening immigration policy has made that less likely, so people bring their entire families, often traveling for months. We saw the wall in Juarez. A dog or a small child could easily walk through it. It's sort of a folly, and it's horrifying. You could easily throw a rope over the top or climb it like a coconut tree. Yet there are cameras everywhere watching it, monitoring it. Like walls around the world, it makes the neighborhood it looms over, and it looms over a poor neighborhood. It makes it look occupied. Children are growing up in its shadow. It feels like a line in the sand across a living, breathing organism that is the Americas, an ancient place of peoples of a common mother, people who have been making their way across these lands like Abraham in our ancient texts, like the birds that flew over those walls as we watched, like the butterflies that fly through the slats, like people on the earth as long as we have known the history of people. In El Paso, we visited Annunciation House, aptly named, and heard from their inspiring leader, Ruben Garcia. It was our first stop on Thursday afternoon, and frankly, I expected a soft entry, usually ease people into something like this. Mr. Garcia would tell us about the services they provide for people released from immigration detention on their way to their families. We would donate what we had brought. We would take notes to start to think about how we can best support the great work they do there. He asked for that directly, so we will. But what happened instead of the peaceful conversation I thought we would have that would just get us oriented to the rest of the trip? What happened when I walked in is there were big cameras, television cameras. They were from MSNBC, and they were doing a story on Annunciation House. I didn't know that the father of Jacqueline, who died, was staying there. Mr. Garcia, and we didn't find out that day, actually, we found out later. Mr. Garcia did talk to us about what they did and what they need from us and what they want us to know. Come and see, they said. It's not what you think. People stay here for a few days while we help them contact a family member who sends a bus ticket, then we get them on their way. If they did not do this, these people would be released to the streets to figure it out for themselves. He said, if you were Spanish-speaking, consider volunteering, come for a couple of months, come self-funded. We need a lot of help. Mr. Garcia said, we're talking fast because a bus is coming now. When people are released from detention, they call us. We send buses to different sites, shelters. We have a network of them in El Paso. One is coming here with about 50 people. He said, we need these chairs. We were sitting in the dining room by the cafeteria, and you could hear the food being prepared right next to us and placed on the serving table, just like in any church. And as we were talking, the bus arrived, and families from Guatemala walked in. They looked shell-shocked. They were silent. They had been in detention. How could they know what was going to happen next, who we were? What had they seen? How long had they been traveling? We all got out of the way as fast as we could. You can imagine how awkward it felt, and waited in the entrance of the building for the group to get back together, our group of 25 or so that were traveling. We waited silently. Most were crying or trying very hard not to. No one of us had expected to see families who had been detained that quickly. As we were waiting, a young man walked in with what I would guess was his daughter. She must have been about 7 years old, and she was little, and she had her hand up like this, the way you hold your parent's hand, that funny awkward step that kids have when they're holding an adult's hand. She looked at us in our silence and sadness and said, "Hola," in that bright, sweet voice that only kids of that age have, and you know it. We all quickly said our holas back, of course, smiling. How could you not? What were we thinking not to greet a person walking by? Of course, through tears. Hola is my enunciation this year. Little Jacqueline, my image of a holy one who thirsts. The holy has come among us, and we might not think we are worthy or capable, but the day of the Lord is upon us, the prophet says. We servants of Caesar are to act in justice, for is not our mother here with us? Ruben Garcia said, when you come to the border, you will see your people. Mi gente, nuestras gente. Nosotros somos la gente.